knew Norman Rockwell made movie posters? Welcome back to Faith on Film, where we raid church libraries in search of the good stuff. I'm Stephanie.
And I'm Nathan. Hey, say, Steph.
Yes?
You ready to get your Protestant socks rocked off?
I suppose so.
We're going full Roman Catholic today. This is a movie from 1943 about Saint Bernadette. As a teenager in Lourdes, France, Bernadette Soubirous had a series of visions about a being who would later be identified as the Virgin Mary. While there was skepticism and devotion within her village, she quickly garnered attention, and the Catholic Church initially doubted her, but eventually came around, and she was then canonized in 1933.
Jewish author Franz Werfel fled to Paris after the Nazis had annexed Austria, and while in hiding with his wife, he encountered the story of Bernadette, and he was so moved by what he heard that he swore that if he made it out of the war alive, he was going to turn Bernadette's story into a novel. And in 1941, the Song of Bernadette was published. So it should be noted that today's movie is not so much an adaptation of Bernadette's life as much as it is an adaptation of Werfel's novel. That is an important distinction. Now I just realized I might owe my 6th grade teacher another apology. Anyway, the movie starred Jennifer Jones, Charles Bickford, Gladys Cooper, and Vincent Price, and was directed by Henry King.
The movie was a very big hit in its day, and it was nominated for 12 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. It won 4 of those. Best Actress in a Leading Role, Best Score, or Best Original Score, Best Art Design, and Best Cinematography. And, incidentally, those are the 4 elements which have aged the best.
This is definitely one of those movies that is going to rise or fall with its leading actress. And fortunately for us, Jennifer Jones really works in the part of Bernadette. It's hard to describe. This is a character who could easily be very annoying in a way that Pollyanna often annoys people, but it works. Jones just exudes this innocent wonder, for lack of a better word, that you can't help but root for Bernadette to come out on top. She's melting my stubborn Protestant heart!
Don't worry, I'll nail some theses to your heart.
That just sounds uncomfortable.
What a delusion believing she sees Mary. This movie and everybody who likes it.
Hi, a-hole atheist. Nice to see you.
Man, I can't stand people who believe in like that, like all that Bronze Age. And then we gotta watch movies about it, man.
Well, I think you'd like the prosecutor played by Vincent Price.
Why?
Well, he gives a speech about how religion is holding the world back.
Ooh, Vincent Price! Vincent Price!
I would like to point out that the real Vitality Tour was actually a devout Catholic. He wanted to believe Bernadette, he just didn't. And I would also like to point out that in real life, Vincent Price was against all forms of prejudice. That includes religious prejudice.
Boo! Vincent Price! Vincent Price!
Don't make me use the wand of power on you.
And you coward, you speak up to religious people.
Well, I warned him.
You did.
Anyway, yes, Vital is built up from an ordinary Catholic who happened to not believe in Bernadette's claims to an antagonistic atheist who is out to bring her down by any means necessary.
Oh, that trope is never, ever gonna get old now, is it?
I'm not gonna claim that the trope could never work. I've never seen it work, but this is one of the closest I've seen to that actually happening. I will say, though, it comes across as a little manufactured, because we very early on see Vital with the other town officials discussing how they're going to stop Bernadette and her followers from going to Massabille for their daily devotions, but they can't find a law that's actually being broken, so they're kind of powerless.
Yeah.
Just one question. Why do you care? It's a bunch of people going and kneeling in a cave. It doesn't seem like something you should have a reason to stop.
There's a passing comment about how there's supposed to be this railroad that's going to be built in Lourdes, but now the railroad isn't going to be built here because they have a crazy person in there. Okay. Why would a railroad reroute itself because a local teenager sees Mary? That seems like a drastic overreaction. It didn't come as a surprise to me that it turned out that the author of the book exaggerated the secular opposition that Bernadette faced. It's funny because there's also going to be opposition from the church later, but you're kind of checked out because you've already spent so much time dealing with all of these other townsfolk who don't believe her that it's kind of repetitive when the opposition from the church shows up, which is too bad because the opposition from the church is the interesting part.
Well, Vital does come back after the first 30 minutes because, okay, so the local priest, Father Paramal, I'm sorry, I don't speak French. Father Paramal, when she came to him with a request from the lady, he asked for a miracle of a rose bush blooming out of season. And, well, that doesn't happen. But Bernadette is told by the lady to drink from the water, and since she doesn't see any water, she just starts digging and winds up uncovering a spring. This spring goes on to have claims of miraculous healings because there was a dying boy who was dipped in it and he was revived. You get the idea. Well, at this point, Vital starts digging through old laws until he finds a tucked away ordinance about how water needs to be tested by a chemist before it can be approved for public consumption. And on those grounds, he cuts off the entire grotto. Without even looking this up, I immediately suspected that this was, in real life, done with the actual intent of public safety and not with any malicious intent. But I guess the movie needed a villain somewhere.
You already have a perfectly serviceable antagonist in the form of Gladys Cooper, who plays a school instructor nun named Sister Maria. This is not as exaggerated. The real-life Sister Maria actually was antagonistic towards Bernadette. So this does work better. She's actually a jerk to Bernadette even before she sees Mary. She just never liked this kid. And the movie says that her motivation behind her continued dislike of Bernadette is she can't understand why Mary would appear to somebody like Bernadette instead of somebody like her. This is also a trope that you're going to see in a lot of faith-themed films. However, I find this one doesn't irritate me as much. I don't know, maybe it's because I just like seeing the high and mighty get handed some humble pie.
Sister Marie is basically all of those stories you hear out of Catholic school about nuns whacking kids over the wrist with rulers come to life. That's not to say she's a one-note character, but you can tell this is a woman who has made herself miserable because it's what she believes will please God.
So, as I mentioned earlier, I was first shown this movie in the 6th grade. And as the years went by, I gotta be honest, I completely forgot about the mayor and Vincent Price and the city officials. I remembered Bernadette's parents, and I remembered the priest played by Charles Bickford, and this nun played by Gladys Cooper. They were the characters that actually left an impression on me. Should probably tell you something.
Her parents are also quite reluctant to believe her, and it even gets to the point where her mother forbids her from going to Massabielle and is prepared to ship her off to her aunt's house in order to avoid being the ridicule of Lourdes. But her aunt says, hey, we're her family, we should support her whether we believe her or not. And she also raises a very salient point that there's nothing about her claims of seeing something supernatural that would contradict their beliefs.
No.
I always find it very strange, the lines that religious people are ready to draw about what sounds plausible to them. Like, oh yeah, parting the Red Sea, I'm on board with that. Virgin birth? Sure. Jesus visiting the Americas to talk to the Jews in exile there? Nope, that's too silly.
And it's also funny, too, a lot of the skepticism surrounding Mary appearing to Bernadette in the grotto is the fact that it is a grotto. It seems unlikely to people that somebody as holy as Mary would appear in some place like a grotto.
Because it operates as the city dump.
And that is where I would also have to raise the question, have you read your own gospel recently? I would like to point out that Jesus' life started in a feed box. So, the whole God wouldn't appear in a place like this because something as dirty as this isn't holy enough also never really works for me, especially when you're going to push the idea that holiness is achieved through suffering.
And this is actually a major part of Sister Marie's complaint regarding Bernadette, because she believes that Bernadette hasn't suffered enough. She winds up changing her tune when she learns that Bernadette has suffered from cancer for an indeterminate amount of time, and to the point that it's past the point of no return.
I would like to ask Sister Maria, though, what constitutes as suffering? Bernadette is established very early on to be someone who gets sick very often. It's mentioned that she's asthmatic, and her family is in really bad poverty at the beginning of the movie. We actually start this film with her father trying to find work so his family doesn't starve, and the only thing he can find is burning diseased rags for the hospital in the city dump where Bernadette is later going to see Mary. So, define suffering for me, please.
The movie frames her silence about her constant pain as heroic, and that rubs me the wrong way. Like, sure, there's something admirable about not complaining about your problems all the time, but when you have a serious illness, you should probably say something so you can get treatment.
It's allowed. It's interesting because stories about human suffering is as old as storytelling itself. And I can understand the impulse to romanticize suffering, especially when your protagonist is someone who is going to die young. And Bernadette did die young.
Only 35.
But that being said, in this context, there really isn't any reason for her to be silent about her illness. So I'm not sure that her staying quiet about it really is as heroic of an action as this movie makes it seem. It's more like they're almost showing off her holiness at this point. Look how saintly she is. She's above such things as reporting to the doctor that she has an illness.
Suffering is an inevitable part of life.
Yes, it is.
So, learning to cope with it or even embrace it, that's just part of living.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a far cry between that and what we see going on here. Find a middle ground. I'm no expert on tumors or cancer, especially not in this era, so I'm not remotely going to claim she could have been cured, but
No.
She could have gotten treatment much, much earlier had she said something.
And it wouldn't make her any less of a hero if she did.
No. I will say, though, this leads into the end point of Gladys Cooper's character arc. Because once she realizes what Bernadette's been going through, she rushes into the convent's chapel by herself to beg God for forgiveness for being such a condescending jerk to his messenger earlier. It's an incredibly well-acted scene.
Mm-hmm.
And I like it quite a lot. I just wish we had gotten here by some other means.
So, from what I've gathered, this particular instance of Sister Marie repenting and swearing to take care of Bernadette for the rest of her life didn't happen, but it's well acted enough. I'll give this one a pass. What I will not give a pass to is the romantic subplot you decided to shove in.
Romantic subplot?
Mm-hmm.
But she becomes a nun.
That doesn't stop Hollywood. Yeah, so she has this friend named Antoine, and they're rather sweet on each other. He helps her across a bridge one time. He remarks what a special girl she is. And then when she's leaving the town and off to join the convent, he pulls her aside to let her know that he has taken a vow of celibacy. He will never marry because he can never love anybody else like he loved her.
Blech.
Yeah.
It's just so obviously unnecessary and tacked on. Their affection for each other never affects any other story beat. It's not even like he presents a great temptation for her to not go to the convent. Like, there's a passing mention of the possibility of getting married to him, but Father Paramal doesn't really have to work that hard to convince her out of it and just go to be a nun. So, what was even the point?
There was no point. Word of advice to any future writers out there: if you're going to add things to your source material, make sure that they contribute something, because if they go nowhere, you're just padding. You know, we should probably talk about Father Paramil, played here by Charles Bickford. I do like this character. Bickford has a great way of carrying himself. He's very priestly. He's authoritative, he's no nonsense, but he also is compassionate. Bickford finds that line between strict authoritarian and somebody who you genuinely believe wants to take care of his flock. And I do like the repertoire he has with Bernadette later once he comes around to believing her. And he is willing to admit when he is wrong.
For instance, when Vital comes back into the story, it's Paramil who stands up for Bernadette and actually opposes Vital. And at first, this appears to be because of Bernadette's claims of the lady being the Immaculate Conception. Let me explain. Okay, so for a good stretch of the movie, Bernadette makes no claim about who the lady is supposed to be. She says that the lady hasn't told her. But then one day, the lady says, "I am the Immaculate Conception." And Paramil has to explain this to her because they haven't covered that yet in her theology classes. He says that the Immaculate Conception was when Mary was conceived without original sin.
My Protestant heart is hardening again.
I'm fine. So, it seems like he's won over by the fact that she knows that phrase without having learned it. But
then, when she's leaving the town and he's saying goodbye to her, he says that the one thing in her story that he never could believe was the Immaculate Conception statement. So, if that wasn't what convinced you, what was? His argument for continuing to not believe it is that a conception is an event and a person is not an event.
Well, that seems like a lot of semantics.
That's religion for you. But seriously, what did change Paramil's mind then? I seriously, what was it?
I don't know.
It's just another case of great acting being let down by not as good writing.
That's this movie in a nutshell.
Sadly, yes.
What'd you expect? It's about a crazy cult leader in France. France!
A lot of French people are atheists.
You know what I mean.
I'm not sure I do.
50 Frenchmen can't be wrong?
You're missing the point. This girl saw a vision of the Virgin Mary And suddenly all these people are supposed to do it.
You're abusing those air quotes.
Shut up! Suddenly all these people are supposed to be doing what she's saying? Bullshit, man.
Shockingly, he has some semblance of a point.
Well, I guess broken clock is right twice a day.
It does get a little iffy when Bernadette starts relaying commands from the lady to give to other people. Like, when it's just a bunch of people going and kneeling in a cave for a while, that's fine. But once she starts telling other people what to do, it does get into some murky territory. Like, there's a bigger discussion to be had about morality here, but suffice it to say, I land on the blind obedience, especially when the being giving orders can't be verified to even exist. Bad. Anyway, back to the movie.
You know, we haven't really talked about the other things that this movie won Academy Awards for.
True.
So let's start off with the cinematography and the art direction. It's really interesting how black and white really can convey different moods, sometimes better than color, whether it's a scary situation or a reverent situation. There's just a lot of great work here with lighting, with shadows, like this scene here, where Bernadette and her mother are by the fire, or the way that the screen literally lights up when Mary appears. This is definitely one of those movies that would be ruined if you colorized it. Don't get any ideas, Hollywood. Do not colorize this one. It really plays to the strengths of black and white film. The costumes, the set, the all-around direction. This is a very beautiful looking film. And then there's the music, composed by the late, great Alfred Newman.
Doesn't ring a bell.
Alfred Newman, 9-time Academy Award-winning composer, 43 other nominations, more critical acclaim than any other composer in history till John Williams came along, father of Thomas Newman, uncle of Randy Newman.
Oh, Randy? The Toy Story guy?
Yes.
I love Toy Story. It's about how God doesn't give a about us.
I'm not gonna ask where you came up with that. Anyway, Alfred Newman. How the West Was Won, Anastasia, All About Eve. He wrote this.
Oh.
I will say, I'm not as familiar with Alfred Newman's music as I am some of his contemporaries. However, just going off of this movie alone, I can see why he's considered one of the all-time greats and is sometimes called one of the godfathers of film music. This is a very well done score. It really does elevate every scene that it's in. It's not too loud so you can't hear what's going on, or too soft. Like, it is pretty pitch perfect. Pun sort of intended, I suppose. The mood is always just about right. The use of vocals is lovely. Instrumentation, it's very good. These awards were very well earned.
Then there's the pacing. And maybe it's just the fictional elements that were created by Werfel, but the movie feels way too long.
Watch this movie in the afternoon.
Yeah. It gets to the point that once she makes her vows, it feels like you're starting a completely different movie and you want it to just be over already.
To this movie's defense, it does have a lot of years to cover. I don't know, I feel like we are ragging on this movie more than I initially expected to, but I think that's just because the things in this movie that work so well that it makes the things that don't work really stick out and become even more aggravating.
Like the tagline.
Yeah.
For those who believe in God, no explanation is necessary. For those who don't believe, no explanation is possible. This is evidently a quote from Thomas Aquinas.
What a lame excuse. It just means you don't have any evidence. Losers. You, mother.
How do these crazy people keep getting in here?
I don't know. This statement always struck me as kind of a pretentious way to open up your movie. Applying this quotation to this story right up front, well, you're kind of disregarding the many people out there who believe in God but don't necessarily believe in Mary. Those two things are not really mutually exclusive. And you're also kind of throwing people like the real Vital Detour, who wanted to believe Bernadette but just didn't, completely under the bus. I also have to ask the question, if this is a Thomas Aquinas quote, what in the heck does he have to do with this? Aquinas and Bernadette lived years apart, centuries.
And even so, why not just attribute it to Thomas Aquinas? It looks like they're just quoting Father Armil at the beginning of the movie.
Yeah.
Overall, this is a better than average movie.
Mm-hmm.
Although, what you look for in a movie like this depends on what kind of person you are.
So I think I do owe Mrs. McCarty that apology.
There you go.
I can definitely understand why there are people out there who find this movie moving and inspiring. Jennifer Jones is that good in this part, and it is a sweet story. And there are other characters in this movie that I do really like. However, the forced conflicts and added subplots ultimately bog this movie down. At the end of the day, it's maybe just a touch too long. There's maybe just a little too much going on to completely hold your attention. So for that, I'm going to give this one a satisfactory, mostly because I kind of don't feel right giving this the same score as Dark Dungeons.
I have no such compunction, so I'm going to give it a good enough.
This movie is bad. It's Catholic propaganda. It's about God.
Nobody asked you. Thank you for joining us for Faith on Film. I'm Nathan.
And I'm Stephanie.
And I'm the whole atheist.
You're not affiliated with me.